we are going to study the topic of persistence. Now, persistence is a topic that belongs to your Unit 5. So, let us see few concepts related to persistence. So, the concept of persistence itself is very simple. What does persistence mean? It means that you want to store the data in such a manner that even when we turn off the power, the data should not be lost. Normally, what happens? We turn off the power, the data is lost. The program execution ends, the data is lost. We don't want that to happen. What we want is, we want to keep the data after the power is off. And that is where we come up with the concept of persistence. Now, whenever we want to store the data outside the application's active memory, then that memory is called as persistent data store, because even after the application shuts down, even after the program shuts down, the data in this memory will stay. It will still be there. So persistent data stores के examples क्या है? What are the examples of persistent data stores? Your relational database, your object-oriented database, or your flat file systems. Now, is there any other scenario where I'll want to use persistent data store? Many times we have to roll back the system. Some error has occurred, some system failure has occurred. We want to get it back to its previous valid state. So in that case, again we will use data persistent. So persistent allows the data to outlive the execution of the application that has created it. So the application may shut down, the program may turn off, but the data that the program is dealing with will still be there. Okay? So whenever we want to store something for a longer amount of time, we use persistence. Now when I talk of persistence, we have to consider two aspects. One, the length of time the data must be persisted, and second is the volume of the data. Let us take a simple example. We all have studied sessions. So in sessions what happens? The data is persisted, but the time is limited. So data is persisted only till the point the user is logged in into the system or the session does not end. So if I require the data to be shared among multiple users, or I want the data to be shared among multiple sessions of the same user, then in that case HTTP session fails us. So we need some other other way of maintaining persistence. Now let us go to the next concept that is related to persistence, that is persistence in Java. So we have understood what is persistence. We want to store the data beyond the execution of the program. प्रोग्राम को बंद हो जाने दो, आपका डेटा वैसे के वैसे ही रहना चाहिए. अभी persistence कैसे achieve करेंगे in Java? So usually, when we want persistence in Java, we just save our data in SQL. That is, we save our data in some relational database management system. We have something called as JDBC to achieve the data persistence. So we store the data in the database. We access the data firing SQL queries. But that data is very different, because that data is in terms of rows and columns. It is in forms of tables. Whereas when I work with object-oriented models, I work with C++, I work with Java, we are working with domain model or we are working with object-oriented model. In this case, we are not talking in terms of tables, rows or columns. We are talking in terms of objects. So when you think of Java, the way the program logic is developed, the way the business logic is developed, the way the objects work with each other, it is not same as tables of your database. So object persistence deals with persistence in the object-oriented programs such as Java. So when I talk of object persistence, I want to determine how the objects and their relationships will be persisted in the relational database. Now, object persistence is about mapping the object state Identifying how the object state will be stored in the database tables and columns. The difference or the problem over here is the data types in Java and the data types in the relational database will not match. The structure of objects and the structure of tables does not match. Now the question is, if you want persistence, why not do everything in the database only? Why you need Java? Why you need object-oriented model? The reason is, in relational databases, you can store the data. Persistence is there. Data management is there. It is something that has always been used with database software development. That is all true. But when it comes to business logic, nothing is better as compared to your object-oriented models. You cannot implement that business logic in the database. The design patterns like, inheritance, polymorphism, or maintainability of the code or reusability of the code is far way better in your object-oriented models as compared to the relational database. So we need object-oriented models also. We need relational database also. But we need persistence also. So how to achieve it? Please note one thing. The object-oriented model is also called as domain model or it is called as object model. So don't get confused between the three terms. So now where are we? We cannot give up on object-oriented model. We cannot give up on relational database. So we want to have a mapping between our object-oriented model and our relational databases. So how do we achieve it? The next question that we will talk about is persistence standards which are available in Java or ways of achieving persistence in Java. So following are the ways of achieving persistence in Java. The very first one is serialization. Serialization talks about converting the object into the series of bytes which you can either store in a file or you can send over a network. The concept of serialization is quite simple, but it has lots of disadvantages. The first disadvantage is that if your information is huge, your object is huge, then it is not suitable. Serialization is not suitable when you are dealing with large amount of data. Second, making changes in the objects is not easy. If any error occurs while updating, then undoing it is not possible. So any application that requires very strict data integrity, serialization is not a good option. Another disadvantage is no concurrent access to the information. Concurrent access means what? Multiple threads or multiple programs cannot read and write the data simultaneously. Okay, so one program is reading, other program has to wait back. And it does not have any querying capability. See, what happens, we write SQL queries. We fetch the data very quickly. Serialization does not support it. Now, obviously, we have to overcome it. So, we go ahead with our second option, that is JDBC, Java Database Connectivity. JDBC, the problem is that JDBC was never designed for storing the objects. JDBC will allow your Java programs to interact with the database. But that interaction is dependent on SQL. It is dependent on SQL. Key reading the row, reading the column, reading the data from the table, inserting the data into the table, updating the data into the table, everything can be done via JDBC. That is the major disadvantage of JDBC. But JDBC does overcome the limitations of serialization because it ensures data integrity. It allows you to handle large amount of data. It does allow you to have concurrent or simultaneous access to the information. And it does provide a very sophisticated query language we all use, that is SQL. So JDBC is better than serialization, but it is not the solution that we are looking for. So let us go to the third solution, that is EJB2 entity beans. Now, Enterprise Edition of Java has introduced entity enterprise Java beans, where we can, we can store we can store objects as objects in the data store. So EJB entity beans, they provide an object oriented view of persistent data, and because they follow a very strict standard, the portability increases. But there's a disadvantage with EJB entity beans. One, it is slow. It is difficult to code. It is not serializable. It makes it mandatory for you to have one-to-one mapping to the database tables. It is expensive to run on servers. So, the mapping has to be done properly. As well as it does not support the major features that we want, that is inheritance, polymorphism, and complex relations. So because of this reason, we may not always go with entity beans. So what is the next option for us? The next option is Java Data Objects, JDO. It is another persistent standards that came up due to the failure of EJB entity beans. Means EJB entity beans had some disadvantages, so we came up with Java Data Objects. So Java Data Objects did provide you with the query language, object-oriented query language. It did support non-relational databases, but the programmers, the commercial vendors, and the community never accepted JDO as integral part of enterprise Java platform. So that was a major, showstopper for Java Data Objects. Ki no one really accepted that framework. And now, lastly, what we have is Java Persistence API, that is JPA. It is a Java-based solution for persistence, and it uses object relational mapping to bridge the gap, to cover the gap between your domain model, your object-oriented model, and the relational database. Remember what I told you earlier, domain model, object model, or object-oriented model means the same thing for us. Now, Java Persistence consisted of Java Persistence API, query language, and object relational mapping metadata. We are going to study JPA or Java Persistence API in much detail later on, so right now I am not focusing much on it. That's it for this answer. Thank you.